Jesus Olguin from University of California, Santa Barbara. And this is a joint paper with Nicholas Lester from University of Zurich. And this is a paper about a quantitative study of counterfactual condition construction in worldwide perspective. I'm trying to give you warnings in the chat about the time, but so you have now 18 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay, so let me, first of all, can you see the slides? Just to double check this. Okay, perfect. Okay, so
Perfect, yeah.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I really want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. And well, as can be observed in the slide, this is work with Nick Lester. And well, as can be observed in the slide, the title of our talk is A Quantitative Study of Counterfactual Conditional Constructions in Worldwide Perspective. Okay, so the following is the outline of today's talk. And well, as can be observed, obviously, first of all, I will provide some general introduction to the topic. And then I will explain the goals and the sample use for the present study. And after this, I will explain the main parts of today's talk, which are composed of two main studies, study number 1 and study number 2. And at the end, I will provide some final remarks of today's talk. And that's basically the outline for today. Well, okay, so first of all, the introduction. So it is very important to mention that one semantic relation that has received little attention cross-linguistically is that of counterfactual conditionals. And by counterfactual conditionals, we are talking about constructions that express situations that didn't occur or couldn't occur. And just to give you one English example here so that you can have a clear idea of what we are talking about. So consider the following example from English. If you had gone to the party, you would have danced a lot. Obviously, this type of construction expresses an imagined situation that didn't occur. And well, we concentrate on this type of construction in the present typological study. And well, so various studies have addressed this semantic relation of counterfactual conditionals in individual languages, in particular macro areas, and also in particular language families. However, only a few broad cross-linguistic studies have explored counterfactual conditional constructions. And well, the present study aims at contributing to this typological research on counterfactual conditionals. In this study, in the present study, we consider a genetically and areally balanced sample of 107 languages. And well, so the goals. Obviously, it is not possible to address in today's talk all of the different parameters or the parameters that are relevant to the study of counterfactual conditionals. And for the sake of time and space, we decided to concentrate on 3 main parameters. The first one is concerned with asymmetric and asymmetric morphological behavior of counterfactual conditionals. I will explain in a moment what is this. The second parameter is concerned with the range of tense aspect mood values that appear in the if clause and also on the main clause. And the third parameter, and the last one, is concerned with the range of clause linking strategies by which counterfactual conditionals are encoded in the languages of the sample. And well, once we analyze these parameters in the languages of the sample, we apply one statistical analysis of these distributions. And by applying this statistical analysis, we test which of the factors that we are considering lead to symmetric and asymmetric systems. Again, in a moment, I will explain what we mean by symmetric and asymmetric. And well, that's basically, those are basically the goals. Now, the sample. So for the purposes of the present study, we take into account a genetically and areally balanced sample of 107 languages. And we built this sample based on the genus macroarea method proposed by Gestable. And well, in this method, the primary genealogical stratification is made at the genus level, and the primary areal stratification is made at the level of macro areas. And we follow, in this particular case, a bottom-up approach. What is this? We attempted to find one language from each of the Dryer's genera for which we could find explicit and detailed information about counterfactual conditionals. And as can be observed in this table, in this slide, we tried to be careful regarding the number of of general that we consider for each macro area, so that we can have an areally balanced sample as well. So, and well, the following slide, in this slide, we can see the table that provides a more detailed information about the number of languages that we consider from each macro area. And well, that's basically the sample. And now I would like to start talking about study number one. And in the study number one, we will concentrate on 3 parameters. Okay, parameter number 1 is concerned with the symmetric and asymmetric. Okay, now I will explain what we mean by this. So cross-linguistically, counterfactual conditionals may be marked, may be encoded by the very same tense aspect, by different tense aspect mode values. That is, the if clause or the prophecies and the main clause or hypothesis will occur with different tense aspect mode values, as can be observed in the example in 1 from Imonda. In this case, the if clause appears with the irrealis marker, and the main clause or hypothesis appears with a counterfactual mood marker T. And therefore, we have this asymmetric morphological pattern. Interestingly, many languages around the world have symmetric counterfactual conditionals. What is this? Well, as can be observed in the example in 2 from Zapotec, we observe that both clauses appear with the very same tense aspect mood values. And this is known in the literature as symmetric counterfactual conditionals. Well, please keep in mind that I will use arrows of different colors so that we can spot more easily the features that we are interested in these examples. And well, what about the cross-linguistic distribution of these symmetric and asymmetric morphological patterns? Well, as can be observed, for the most part, languages seem to prefer, at least in the sample, seem to prefer asymmetric morphological patterns, such as the example that we have in 1. But interestingly, in languages spoken in Australia and also in Papua New Guinea, this is indicated by red dots, languages tend to prefer symmetric morphological patterns in counterfactual conditionals. Again, by symmetric morphological patterns, I am talking about instances such as the example in 2 from Zapotec. And well, what about parameter number 2? Well, this is concerned with the range of tense aspect mode values that appear in counterfactual conditional constructions. And well, for the sake of clarity, I will concentrate first on the tense aspect mode values that appear in the prophecies or the if clause, and then I will explain the tense aspect mode values that appear in the hypothesis or main clause. What about the prophecies? Well, the prophecies of counterfactual conditional constructions tend to appear with past tense markers or perfecting markers, as can be observed in the example in 3 from Teribe. And they may also appear with irrealis markers, as in the example in 4 from Guniyandi, in which the if clause appears with this irrealis marker ala. Okay, what about the distribution? Well, again, for the most part, again, languages tend to prefer past or perfect markers and also irrealis markers. Something that I forgot to mention is that some languages may prefer mixed patterns. What is this? There are languages in which past or perfecting markers may occur at the same time with irrealis marker in the very same in the prophecies, and this gives rise to mixed pattern. At least this is the way in which we operationalize this value in the sample. And well, what about tense aspect mode values that appear in the hypotheses? Well, interestingly, for the most part, the languages of the sample tend to appear with irrealis markers, as can be observed in the example in 5 from Rama, in which the hypothesis or main clause appears with this irrealis marker ut. Okay, and well, the table illustrates in more detail this cross-linguistic distribution of this pattern in the hypotheses. Okay, and the last parameter, which is concerned with the range of clause linking strategies by which counterfactual conditional constructions are encoded. Well, for the purposes of this study, we classify these strategies in the following ways. The following is the way in which we operationalize these strategies. So the first one is specialized devices. And by specialized devices, clause linking devices, we are talking about devices that only occur in counterfactual conditionals. That is, if you have real or habitual or generic conditionals, these are going to appear with another clause linking device. There are other languages in which all types of conditional clauses appear with the very same clause linking device. And Awaruna, this language is spoken in South America, illustrates this pattern. In this particular case, counterfactual conditionals appear with ka, this sort of converb strategy. And also other types of conditional clauses appear with the very same clause linking device. And finally, we have parataxis. And by parataxis, we are talking about instances in which the prophecies and the hypotheses occurred without a linking device. There is no linking device conjoining the if clause and the main clause. Some of you may wonder, what about prosody here? Well, prosody obviously plays a role here, but the sources of the sample do not provide explicit information about the role of prosody here, and therefore we decided not to include this very important domain about prosody. But well, this is something to keep in mind. Now, what about the distribution of these types of devices that I showed you before? Well, again, for the most part, languages tend to prefer non-specialized devices. That is, devices that appear in all types of conditional clauses. After this, we have parataxis. That is, there is no linking device conjoining the if clause and the main clause. And finally, we have the less common pattern is specialized devices. That is, devices that only occur in counterfactual conditionals. And well, okay, so that was study number one. What about study number two? So once we analyze the the parameters that I showed you before, we perform one statistical analysis. And by applying this statistical analysis, we want to uncover which variables predict languages having symmetric or asymmetric counterfactual conditionals. Keep in mind, symmetric patterns, languages in which both clauses appear with the very same tense aspect mode values. Asymmetric patterns, languages in which both clauses appear with different tense aspect mode values. And for this, we use a technique for machine learning known as classification and regression tree analysis. So why we chose this analysis? Well, in particular, we have three main reasons. The first one is that we have a relatively small sample of languages. The second one is that we have several categorical predictor variables with different types of levels. And finally, the third factor that led us to use this statistical technique is that many of the cells in the cross-tabulated predictor space are sparsely populated. And well, that's basically the idea of the statistical analysis we apply here. Now, the following are, in general terms, the results of the present study. And obviously, I will not concentrate on all of the different possible results here, but I will concentrate only on a small part because of the time. And this is the following. So for those languages, this is something that we found. For those languages that have symmetric counterfactual conditionals, obviously, not all types of symmetric patterns are possible. So one possible symmetric pattern, so that means if you have a symmetric pattern, this means that you will have a symmetric pattern such as the one that you observe in 10 from Kukuyelangi, in which you will have irrealis markers on both clauses. Another possibility is that if you have a symmetric pattern, you will have mixed patterns. By mixed patterns, keep in mind that I am talking about instances in which past tense markers or perfective markers combine with irrealis markers at the same time. And this gives rise to the symmetric pattern that we have in the example in 11 from Wardaman, this Australian language. That is, both clauses appear with the very same tense aspect mode values. Now, so something interesting to mention here is that for those languages showing these symmetric systems that we have here, the counterfactual conditional construction is encoded by parataxis. There is no linking device joining the if clause and the main clause, as in the example in 10 from Kukuyalanki. Now, another possibility is that if you have symmetric patterns, the linking device is going to be optional, as in the example in 11 from Wardaman. In this case, the linking device, meaning if, can be dropped and is optional. And therefore, this is something interesting that we find in the languages of the sample. That is, if you have symmetric patterns, you will have parataxis, no linking device, or the device, the clause linking device, is going to be optional, and therefore it can be dropped. Now, one possible explanation for this is the following. So we propose that TAR markers in paratactic counterfactual conditionals, that is, constructions involving no linking device, serve as pragmatic triggers. So in this particular case, the irrealis markers in the example in 10 and this mixed pattern that we have in Wardaman serve as pragmatic triggers of the counterfactual conditional interpretation. So this is in line with Maury and van der Aura, who show that in paratactic counterfactual conditionals, not is left to inferential process. That is, there must be some cues in the construction that is going to enable hearers to understand the interpretation. So again, rather, if a language expresses counterfactual conditionals by means of paratactic constructions, the clauses must be marked as irrealis in order for the counterfactual conditional relation to be inferable. This means that languages are not going to prefer to have symmetric patterns in which, paratactic constructions showing this kind of symmetric patterns involving past tense or perfecting markers. Why? Because these past tense or perfecting markers are not going to be because they do not harmonize with a counterfactual conditional relation. And that's why it is very likely that in paratactic constructions, we will have always, and for the most part, irrealis markers, or the mixed pattern that we observe in the example in 11 from Wardaman, but no past tense markers only. And well, that's the explanation. Now, some final remarks. Hopefully, we were able to show you some interesting picture about counterfactual conditionals. There is a lot of work to carry out still. For instance, there are languages that have a monoclausal construction, such as "if only you were here," or "I would have gone there." So obviously, it is very interesting to compare those constructions that are monoclausal with these counterfactual conditionals that are biclausal, in order to see how tense aspect mode values interact with this. For instance, if you have languages that allow you to have "if only you were here," this kind of monoclausal which, if you have this kind of construction, does this mean that the language is going to express in the very same way this kind of construction in counterfactual conditionals? That is, the prophecies of a counterfactual conditional construction is going to be encoded in the same way as counterfactual monoclausal wish, such as "if only you were here." Well, that's something that remains to be done. And well, hopefully, what we show you today is that by exploring these parameters, it seems to be the case that these symmetric or asymmetric morphological patterns seems to be most strongly associated with the tense aspect mode values of that construction. And that's basically what we want to show you. Well, what we wanted to show you today. Any comments? More than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. I see that there is one question from the audience. Can you see the question, or you want to read it for you?
Let me see. Okay.
Do you have languages in your sample which use dedicated time markers not used outside the counterfactual construction? I have one language for you. This is from Masha Kachaturian. So, and actually, I will join her question in a sense to ask. So in many of the languages, it seems it's relevant. You had the tense is the one used for irreals. So to what extent it influenced the statistical analysis that you have?
Okay, it seems to me that I am not quite fully following the question. Is it possible? Is it in the chat or?
It is in the Q&A.
Oh, Q&A. Let me see.
No, it's not. Now I actually missed it. I don't see. Do you see it now?
Yeah, I can read it. Which use educate use.
So whether you have marked tense
got it.
for the counterfactual, which is not used elsewhere.
No, I don't have languages like that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to know which language is this, so that, yeah, interesting. I'm wondering which language would be this one, because for the most part, you have dedicated tense aspect mood markers that are used outside the realm, the domain of counterfactuals. It's going to be very weird to have only exclusive markers, irrealist markers that appear in this counterfactual conditional construction. So interesting.
But I think another question. So the other side of this question would be, how many languages have dedicated tense for irrealists that do not use it in counterfactual? So the question is, to what extent this category actually depends on the availability of such tense elsewhere in the language? That's the other side of this question, I guess, that I want to ask.
Yeah, well, just my impression here is that for the most part, if you have these, okay, it's because the irrealist irrealist markers are very, very like tricky category cross-linguistically. So in some grammars, the authors of the sources explicitly mention, okay, this irrealist marker is a category that can be used in imperative constructions, in questions, in negative constructions, and also in counterfactual conditionals. But there are other authors that in the sources that we consulted that said, okay, irrealist marker only occurs in counterfactual conditionals. And that's it. So that's why this irrealist category is kind of tricky. And it's like, it's kind of tricky, honestly. And that's something that we need to like invest more time in order to like know how to incorporate this idea of irrealist. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. By the way, Masha wrote that you're invited to read her recent paper in linguistic typology, where she described this language.
Interesting. Mano, Mande. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you, Masha.
We have time for another question. Do we have another question? If no one asks, I may ask another question. So towards the end of your paper, you mentioned, you started answering the question that I wanted to ask you, which you said this is optional. So if a language has a tense, then it's optional. So I was wondering how you computed this optionality in your, because this is actually something we know from many languages, that Hebrew, English, like the languages that I know, that we may have a marker for counterfactual, but then can also appear without dedicated markers. So how do you account for it in your statistical analysis?
That's a very good question. So in the sources that we consulted, and also we tried to send emails to the authors of the sources, they mentioned that they carry out some kind of like frequency analysis for this. And okay, in the grammars, they mention, okay, this linker is optional, but obviously they do not mention the frequency. It is more frequent to find this construction without the linking device. And therefore we sent emails to these sources, to the authors of the sources, and they mentioned that for the most part, this linking device does not appear. So therefore we computed these kind of like constructions are as parataxis, no linking device at all, because it is more frequent to find these constructions without this linking device. And that's why we decided to like categorize these constructions as parataxis or asyntheses. So that's pretty much the idea here.
Okay,
but in general terms, something important to mention here is that in general terms, this linking device is has a very high functional load. That is, this linking device is multifunctional, semantic multifunctional. It tends to occur not only in conditionals, but also in other types of in other types of adverbial constructions, such as causal, concessive, purpose. And that's why probably these linking devices are optional, because they are very multifunctional, and they do not contribute a lot to the semantics of the counterfactual conditional constructions, but rather the tense aspect mood values are the ones that are playing an important role here in the expression of counterfactual conditionals. So that's at least the hypothesis that Nick Lester and I have about this optionality.